He's got an undergrad bachelor's degree from Muhlenberg in Russian studies and political science, an MFA in painting from University of Pennsylvania. His work has been shown pretty much all over the world in galleries in London, Mexico City. I had to make notes to have all the things and all the places so that I could remember. Berlin, Doha, including 2 solo exhibitions at Micheal Steinberg Fine Art in New York. His work has been featured in The New Yorker and Time Out New York. And his work is in private and public collections all over the place. He's done residencies in Berlin, Greece, Turkey, Sicily, Qatar. And he was a painting professor at the University of Iowa. And he is currently painting professor in Doha, Qatar with the VCU program there. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Micheal.
Thank you, Dustin, and thanks to Greg and everyone at EMU for the invitation to talk with you. I'm super excited. Nervous, of course, as we always are, but as an artist, sharing your work is, really one of the greatest privileges that we could have. So I'm super excited to do that. I do have a lot of images, as Dustin mentioned. I'm going to go through some of them fairly quickly. Others we'll spend some time with, and hopefully, you'll find it interesting and ask some questions either during, if something comes up, don't hesitate to ask, or if you want to save it to the end, that's great as well. You can hear me okay? Okay, thanks. Let's, okay. Dustin, is my screen sharing, or do you have to enable me again?
Sorry, I have to do it again because you came back in.
Yeah,
One second. Always, never a smooth run with this. All right, here we go. Okay, you should be able to now.
Yep, there we go.
There we go.
Super. Great. Okay, so I'm titling my talk today called Modes of Working, and I'm going to be exploring just basically a timeline from some of my earliest work and just trying to emphasize things I was thinking about at the time, but also approaches that I was taking at that time to my work. This is a very early image from my art school time at the Boston School of Museum of Fine Arts. And as Dustin mentioned, I was a Russian Studies political science major for my BA. So I went to undergrad and I took some art classes. I had been very involved in high school art classes, but didn't go to an art school and didn't study art until after. So this is after my BA. I'm now enrolled in the School of Museum of Fine Art, and I'm taking a basic painting course, Painting from Life. And I like to start with this image just because it has some qualities in the painting that I think stayed with me throughout my 30 plus years of painting. And those things are this muted palette, kind of a quiet palette, some kind of, diagonal or composition that might be off-putting or maybe seems awkward in a way. And then just this, more recently, my work has been focused on this idea of the monumental. And even though this is just a painting of a jar of gesso or something, it kind of, for me, takes on this monumental significance. So 1999 or so, I was living on Nantucket Island, and I had been painting now for a few years. I had gone to the museum school. I had also participated in a program to get my teaching certificate so that I could teach public art. And I did that for a couple of years, but it wasn't the right thing for me. So I kind of took a break from that and returned to this place, Nantucket, where I had spent several years. And I was just painting on my own. I wasn't in classes. I wasn't, even thinking about a career as an artist. I was just trying to gain more experience. And so I was painting from the landscape, and I was painting with a French easel, just taking it out, finding interesting places, setting it up, and starting the painting. And then often I would finish the painting back in the studio, which was my apartment at the time, because I was not a professional artist. These paintings are small. They're like 1 foot square. It's oil on panel. And a big theme at that point for me was just a sense of place. And I was literally just painting the places that I was living or the spaces that I was occupying. Things moved on, and I continued to paint. I continued to take some small classes at artist associations, and eventually I was able to attend University of Pennsylvania, where I started a MFA in painting program, and that was in 2002. So this is the first painting that I made there. It's slightly larger than the others, say like 2 foot square, oil on wood panel. But some of the same themes are coming through: architecture in the landscape, interest in geometry and precision of line and shape. So I was looking a lot at the precisionist painters like Ralston Crawford and Charles Sheeler, painters that became prominent in the 1930s during the Industrial Revolution. And this image was inspired by driving along the New Jersey Turnpike, going from New York to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, which was, even though I was in school, I was still visiting New York regularly. And so I found traveling by car was like a really meditative time for me, and a time where I could think about what I was seeing. And even though, yes, I should have been focused on driving, I was really looking at the landscape. And I was also, it was the beginning of my first digital camera, I remember, in 2002. So I was taking a lot of photographs while driving. At grad school, some of you are in grad school now. For me, one of the big things I got out of it was just being pushed to try new things, try different things. So even though here, maybe you see some similarities to the previous painting, very simple, geometric, landscape. But now I'm starting to experiment with color. And that's most likely because I'm being pushed by my professors there, pointing out that the sky isn't always blue, naturalistic colors, aren't always present. So I'm starting to experiment with color. This is a 4 foot square painting, again, oil on panel. This is a larger painting, 4 foot by 8 foot, and I was using like one-shot oil enamel paint. And again, like I look at this painting now, 15 years later, and I still, it gives me a feeling of angst and, I still don't like the painting, and whether it's good or bad doesn't matter. It was more about the lesson for me of painting in a way that maybe felt uncomfortable, painting using a palette that I certainly didn't feel comfortable with, at a size I didn't feel comfortable with, but still holding on to something that felt good, which was this architecture in the landscape. The next semester of grad school, I started to experiment. It was right when this was 2002, 2003, and the war in Afghanistan and then Iraq was in the news. And I started to do a radical shift conceptually and just start to make paintings. That whole second semester of grad school, I made paintings about this, the war or the impending war, and then while it was happening. And again, these are large paintings, maybe it's a 6 foot by 8 foot panel, and I'm using this oil enamel one-shot paint. And a lot of things going through my mind, as you could see here, and I'm trying to get in a lot of different thoughts into the painting. But the general theme here was kind of, like war tourism. It just seemed like the way that that war was being marketed on television and on the news. It was almost like, why don't we put a monorail in the war zone and we could go visit it like one would visit Disney World or something. But that, it was a little forced in a way, conceptually. It was very topical, and I learned a lot from doing that body of work, but something didn't feel right. So at the end of the semester, and this was one thing, when I was in graduate school, I really used the structure of graduate school to my benefit, I think. Like, it's very unnatural. Artists don't work in semesters or, midterms or whatever, but students do. So I use that as a way to kind of chart my growth, like, okay, at the end of this semester, I want to be here. At the end of this semester, I want to be there. And so that semester ended with those war paintings. And I just felt like, okay, I've been here 1 year. I've learned a lot. My color has changed a lot, playing with new surfaces and new materials. And why don't I now take what I've learned and bring it back into that thing that is inside me, and that could be most easily described as architecture in the landscape. So this was a painting, again, inspired by driving on the New Jersey Turnpike, seeing some kind of infrastructure, cement overpass, and abstracting it. Similarly, buildings, architecture in the landscape. I'm now painting with acrylics, so that was my big shift, working through oil, then through these oil enamels and other materials. I wanted to work with something that gave me this high gloss quality, like the oil enamels, but didn't have the smell or the toxicity of the oils. So at that point, I switched over to acrylics, and I started to use tape, mostly Scotch tape, to help me, create these very sharp edges. And again, that idea of precision that I had always been interested in. The next phase was just a slight twist on that, and it became where I started to use texture. So now I'm taking the precision of the man-made, like the buildings, and I'm adding like this counter, this very thick texture, dewy paint, kind of disgusting paint that was the natural element, in this case, like the trees or bushes. And so for the next few months, and really for the rest of graduate school, that was pretty much my concept, this artificial, man-made nature, and trying to find a beauty in that, even though our inclination, our first inclination when we see that is maybe a negative one. And so I'm doing a lot with texture, which for me was really difficult to do, because I had always really loved the smooth, uniform surface. So just something simple like putting a strange texture on a painting was really difficult, but it helped me to just think about what painting could be and ways that I could rethink my aesthetics. And these paintings are all mostly acrylic on aluminum. I started to paint on aluminum panels, and I really liked the smooth surface of the panels. It allowed me to do certain things with tape that would have been more difficult on canvas. This one's actually like a large PVC panel, Sintra, some people call it, and it's a 4-foot square painting, acrylic on panel. But if you look closely at the composition, you'll see it's basically the same composition that I had done right when I got to graduate school, when I was still really holding on to my own old way of painting, this billboard in the landscape. And really, here it is again, a billboard in the landscape with a factory. The elements are the same, but now the way I'm painting them is different, and the color is certainly different. This is another one that was inspired by the Museum of Science on the Turnpike as you approach the Holland Tunnel. And, I guess in some way I was playing with this idea of, what is beautiful or what is tasteful. And I was trying to expand my ideas of what those words meant to me. And could I accept this painting as being beautiful, something this ostentatious or, in a way, vulgar with its color. And this was kind of a painting that I would call like a kitchen sink painting. It came at the end of a cycle where I threw in all the ideas that I had been thinking about and playing with, both conceptually and formally. So there's lots of texture in here. There's, elements of this fabricated landscape and versus natural landscape. This white orb that's over here is actually like very three-dimensional. It's comes off the canvas like 3 or 4 inches. I kind of sculpted it on there, and it's made with glow-in-the-dark paint, which again was just like, ridiculous. But I would set up these like small challenges for myself, like, okay, could I pull that off? Can I make a painting using glow-in-the-dark paint and take it seriously, like really care about it? And this was my final painting from graduate school, which was just a one-off, totally different than that body of work that I had built up. And it was it was a homage to my friends that we used to play ping pong in our critique room. So we had this room called the White Room, and there was a ping pong table there. We eventually got a new ping pong table, and I made this painting actually on half of the old ping pong table. So it was painting of a ping pong table on a ping pong table. It was a homage to my friends, and Dustin's one of those who we've spent many hours playing ping pong in this room. And I really didn't think about it other than that. I didn't think that it was a new direction for me. I didn't think it was a monumental painting, but it was one of the favorites in my final critique. So a few months later, I'm working at the University of Iowa as an assistant professor, and I started to think more about that ping pong table painting and about the interior spaces. And so for the next 2 or 3 years, that was my focus. Personal spaces, personal interior spaces. And most of these paintings are 2-foot square, acrylic on aluminum panels. And I really just started going through a catalog of places either that I was living in at the time, like that previous painting was the bathroom in Iowa that I was renting this apartment, to paintings like this one, which is the Nantucket bathroom in this house on New Street where I lived with a few friends, one of who's on the Zoom talk today. And I was just like plucking out these places from my memory and from my current life. This was my kitchen area in my New York apartment. And then that's expanded into not so much personal places, but places that I was interacting with on a daily basis. And this was New York subway car interior, because I was living in New York at that time. I took a break from Iowa for 1 semester to go back to New York. I had a show scheduled, and I had this teaching position, but it was really a short-term position. But what wound up happening was when I was in New York for that 1 semester, I really missed Iowa and I missed teaching. And so I reapplied for the job, and I got the job again and went back to Iowa, and then wound up staying there for another 4.5, 5 years. So altogether, I was at Iowa teaching for 6 years, but there was a 1 semester break in there. So this is the Foxhead Bar in Iowa, and it was just a local, really cool but dingy pub that we hung out in. A lot of the painting students and the Iowa Writers Workshop program, they would hang out there and we'd shoot pool. And again, I'm just working from places that are important to me for some reason. So that was a bar painting. I started a series of bars. This is a bar in my hometown Closter called The Rec. It was a bar and a bowling alley. And there's another person on the Zoom today, my buddy Steve, who will know this place because he's from that town as well. And again, I'm doing some similar things. There's like perspective that gets skewed. There's textures that are, kind of exaggerated. There's this lighting effect that I was involved in at that time where I was kind of thinking about light as a material force, that should be rendered in a way, or that would have an effect on things when it would hit them, not just, showing light, but maybe it would do something more drastic, like change their materiality. And also maybe it's just a hangover from watching too many cartoons as a kid, like when they shoot a light beam from a flashlight or a street light comes down, it usually bathes the area in this kind of shape of light. I was also doing some drawing at this time. I think what happened was I had been spending so much time in my studio and really just painting by myself, which, a lot of artists do, and it can be difficult. And I think for this period, I needed to be more social. So I kind of didn't stop painting, but I tried to find other ways to keep my practice going, but also not isolate myself in the studio. So I just started working on very small, I would take a piece of computer paper or several pieces, fold it into fours, tuck it in my back pocket. I had one of those little big yellow pencils that you can, it's like a mechanical Bic pencil. And I would just carry that around with me everywhere. And I just started sketching in public places, bars, cafes, etc. This is another bar from Iowa City called George's. And, maybe an innovation that I did here is this wall of wallpaper where I took a chopstick and dunked it in paint and then printed it. So again, it's like, it's not a massive innovation, but like just a little innovation in a painting can open up new things for you. Other things I'm doing here, like sometimes I would take dried paint off my palette, like in this chair here, this stool, and glue the paint or collage the paint on, cut it out to the shape I want and glue it on. So, the paintings are texturally more interesting in person. This one got to stay in Iowa. The University of Iowa Hospitals has a great art program where they, get to spend a certain amount of money on art each year. So luckily that one got to stay there. So also doing these small abstract drawings, again, mostly when I'm sitting at a bar with friends. Even sometimes we would start, drawing together and just being social, but also being creative. And these drawings are, rooted in some kind of architecture. I'm imagining they're very flat, but I'm also imagining them as spaces, as like, post and beam type structures. And that led me to trying to realize some of these three-dimensionally. So this happened when my wife and I were in Berlin for a summer, and we went to a residency there. And I just happened to find these long matchsticks at a flea market. And just something random like that, finding these matchsticks and being attracted to them in some way, the materiality of them, made me think about my drawings and made me think about, oh, these would be perfect for creating sculptural versions, three-dimensional versions of my drawings. So I started to do that, and then I started to incorporate things into the sculptures, like receipts from our travels and beer labels and things like that. And, was really happy to be able to exhibit these at a bar on a ping pong table. So it kind of was, all these nice elements coming together. And from that, I made a series of small paintings. So again, it's the idea of like the artwork feeds new work. And I think that's something that happens with my work all the time. I'll start something, I'll work with it for a while, I might leave it for a while, and then maybe I'll come back to it. And I think, you'll see some work in a few minutes that is very much related to this, but also different. So I was doing some small gouache drawings, again, thinking about those sculptures or thinking about architecture. I then made, and the previous paintings I just showed you there, these paintings are oil, about 1 foot square on board. And, oh, actually, this one is at my buddy Steve's house, who's here on his iPhone with us. So he now has this painting in his place. And I took that same idea and then brought it into acrylic paint. So this is now a 2 foot square painting, acrylic on aluminum. But basically the same kind of, the inspiration is the same. I'm thinking about structures. I'm thinking about the development of a structure, not just necessarily a fixed structure, but maybe the emergence of a structure over time. And I did maybe 3 or 4 paintings like this. And doing things, again, maybe some innovations technically were like with the aluminum panels, I'm able to like cut back into the paint. So some of these lines here are incised into the paint. So I'm using like tools like an etching needle to cut into the paint and expose the line. And then I'm going back to, this is like 2010 now. I was living in Red Hook, Brooklyn at the time, in a big loft building. And I, again, revisited this idea of the personal interior space. And so this was my wife and my apartment. You could see I'm hanging some artwork. So there's the painting within the painting. And basically, though, I was just treating it just like I had done in Iowa 6 years earlier, now revisiting this motif of interior personal spaces. And this was our studio, the other direction, half the place was our studio, half was the living space. And, I have some paintings on the wall that you'll see later. And this is the painting that I'm doing. And then these are those abstractions that I just showed you. This was another kind of serendipitous moment where my wife and I were in Massachusetts at a used bookstore, and I found this book called Great American Paper Airplanes or something like that. And it was just a book of 20 designs like this to make paper airplanes. And I'm just looking through the book. It might have been $5 or something. And I just was fascinated by these drawings or these designs. And I'm not, even a paper airplane enthusiast. It was more just about this idea of, I guess, like a ready-made in a sense. It's like, okay, here's a composition for a painting, and I don't have to do anything else. I just have to put the color in. And so I started a series of paintings based on those designs, and there was 20 in the book, and I made it through the first 10, and these were all 1 foot squares, oil on panel. And this was kind of like the drawing that I would start with. So I would work from the actual page in the book. I would simplify some things, I would change some things through the process, but basically I was just, taking the design. This painting ended up at a friend's house, his friend Jonas in Queens, and then one of his sons, did his version of the painting. And these are just a couple other images of my paintings, the paper airplane paintings, hanging in a space where they live now, which is with friends, because it turned out that I had these 10 paintings or 9 paintings, I think it was, and they were all framed in the same way. They're actually put in a show that Dustin curated back in early 2000 or no, I guess it was like 2012 or something in Florida. And then I had these paintings hanging around, and I liked the paintings, but, I decided I'm just going to give them to friends. So we had a series of visitors over the course of a summer, and I just started giving the visitors the painting as a gift. And I like to do that a lot. I like to give my work to friends or to people that are interested in them. In this case, this friend bought these 4 paintings of mine, but they were, very cheap, like $30 or $40. I think I even, sold them like at a yard sale to him and to some other paintings to other people. But again, he's hanging them at his house with work from his children, which I, love. It just seems to be something that happens with my paintings often. In this case, my friend Julia found a funny moment where her baby's underwear and diapers are, communicating with some of the forms and shapes in my painting. This is now 2012. I've moved to Richmond, Virginia to start this job at VCU. And it was a really tough time for me. I was really struggling with some anxiety about teaching, and I knew I would be going to Qatar the next year, but I had this 1-year stint in Richmond before going. And my wife and I moved down to Richmond. We weren't really happy there. It was a very strange town. And you've seen some stuff in the news recently with these Civil War monuments. And that was a big part of the unease of being there, the kind of segregation that it was still there when we were there. And it was really troubling to be around. But other things were, eating at me with my confidence, and maybe this idea of going to this school where they had a very strong program, specifically like in sculpture. It was like the #1, sculpture program in the country. And one of the courses I was teaching was this professional practices courses for graduate students that had sculpture students, painting students, photo students. And it was just one of those moments where, I was feeling a little unsure of myself, but I kept my practice going. I was making these sketchbook drawings, and what I was doing was just taking old, sketchbooks where I wrote notes about things or lectures that I would go to. And I just started to scratch away the text in the notebooks. And then I added gouache paint to them to kind of create a landscape. In this case, it's like this rock form, maybe in water at the beach. Then the following year, we made it through Richmond and we moved to Qatar, which, has been an amazing experience for me and my wife, both teaching and just living, this massive cultural shift, and just being away from family and friends and being in this strange landscape of mostly desert and very hot temperatures. So one of the things we did to, bridge that newness of the place is to just explore it. So we would go on lots of weekend trips, just go out into the desert. In this case, we're going to visit these Richard Serra sculptures. You can see in the very far distance, these black monoliths. And, taking pictures along the way, which has become my new sketchbook, just, iPhone, just taking pictures anytime I see something of interest. In this case, it's some kind of land marker that I just found, to be very beautiful and formally really interesting, but at the same time conceptually interesting. This idea that an object can mark a piece of territory. Other strange places we would visit, like this sinkhole, which is called the Cave of Brightness. And there's lots of old abandoned buildings there. And so stumbling on one of those, I saw this interior setup that just, was so weird and so strange to just come across. And so I decided to make a painting of it in the format that I had, become pretty fluent in, of this interior space painting. So now I'm taking this new place and I'm just examining it and getting to know it, getting to know this new place that I'm living in through painting. This is a detail just so you could see some of the things I'm doing here. There's lots of textures. There's, dirt, like I would put things in the paint to just even make the painting look dirty, because this place was dirty. So almost like a literal 1-for-1, like dirt in the space that I saw, dirt on my painting. And I'm using Scotch tape to create Scotch tape and an X-Acto blade to kind of cut out shapes, make like stencils in a way, and then squeegee paint across the surface. Also in Qatar, there's lots of new and interesting architecture, which of course, as I've been talking about, is a big interest of mine. And so I started to incorporate some of the things I was seeing, like this zigzag towers, as these are called, which are my favorite buildings in Doha. And I made a painting, based on those. Obviously, I'm taking some advantage, some creative license here, and incorporating some things that you've seen before in some of my other paintings, including, the shapes, the textures, the colors. And this is just a few other pictures from Qatar and around Doha, just some things that, visually inspire me. And from there, I kind of made, again, one of my like kitchen sink paintings where I'm just throwing all these things into one painting, including, some of these architectural forms, things like palm trees that I see, these strange, sometimes wrapped palm trees, Arabic text, and lots of walls. There's lots of walls in the Middle East. Like, people are very concerned with the idea of privacy. So there's like clear boundaries between the public space and the private space. And car culture is a big thing there. So there's lots of construction and road infrastructure that's constantly changing. And this was early on in my time there, but it was like a time capsule for me. Also related to driving, I started to find myself, this is a picture, I think, of New Jersey or something, the Google map. But similarly, in Qatar, we were driving around and using, a GPS unit, because it was so confusing how to get from one place to another. And so I took that as a metaphor for my painting and started to create this series of paintings that I called the wandering paintings. And yes, there's a connection visually to the Google map, but really it was more about this idea of wandering through the painting, maybe not knowing where you're going, having some kind of destination in mind, but changing it along the way, either by your intention or by, just circumstances. So I created a series of those small paintings, and I made these larger ones. They're maybe like 50 inches by 36 inches. It's burlap stretched on a wooden stretcher. And I'm also starting to put things into my paint, like sand. And in some cases, I put even small quantities of cement. And I was getting this really nice texture. You could see here, there's lots of textures from previous paintings coming through. So I was painting over older work and enjoying that history that was left there. In December of that first year in Qatar, my wife and I, we didn't have to, but if you stay out of the country, out of the US for 1 year, you can separate your residency. You're always going to be a citizen, but you could break your residency with a state and become, this, I guess, expat. So we did that. We went to Paris for the mid-semester break. And while I was there, we celebrated Christmas, and I made these Christmas ornaments out of toilet paper rolls, used toilet paper rolls, and gouache paint. And I enjoyed the process so much. It was like very meditative, very calming, and it was something that I wanted to continue to do. So I did, and I have. And it's been now since 2013. So we're going on, 9 years of painting on toilet paper rolls. And it's just one thing that I do, usually in this setting of like a small table, what I might call my kitchen table paintings. And I probably have, close to 1,000 of these now, both paper towel rolls, toilet paper rolls. There's some behind me you could see on the shelf above on the wall. And again, I just, it's just something I allow myself to do. Some people may think it's silly or, childlike, and it might well be, but for me, it's just a way to not take painting so seriously, but yet take it seriously. And I love these. I love to give them as gifts. I love to share them with people. I love to show them, and I love to work on them. So I'm going to continue to do it, even if it is silly. And this is just kind of the process, and there's kind of a detail, and just simple things like the edge where two colors meet, or the surface that gouache makes on a piece of cardboard. It's just satisfying. And that was a show that was held in a park. It was called Painting in Trees. And so I just took that opportunity to, show the toilet paper rolls. Another, I guess, more serious research project has been my ongoing interest with this idea of monuments. And I was lucky enough to take a trip to the former Yugoslavia territories, now broken into 7 or 8 different countries. And I was doing some research on these monuments called spomenics, which is just a Yugoslavian word for monument. And these are monuments that were built after World War II. They were commissioned by the then president, Tito, and he commissioned artists and architects to build hundreds of these monuments throughout Yugoslavia to commemorate certain battles or certain situations that arose from fighting against fascism. And I was really just super intrigued with them as works of art. Some of you may have seen them, sometimes they're in popular culture in some movies. They're largely made of cement and kind of, brutalist architectural materials. But I found a similarity between them and these drawings that I had been making in my sketchbook. And it's just been something that has been inspiring my work. And these are just like micron pen on sketchbook paper and little Moleskine books where I take notes, lists of things that I want to do. Sometimes I'm at an art lecture and I'm taking notes of what the artist has to say. And then at some point, I don't need those notes anymore. They've become obsolete. And so I turn them into a sketch. And in this case, I turn the sketch into a painting. And these works were a series that were inspired from my travels to Yugoslavia, or former Yugoslavia. And these are about, again, 50 inches by 36 or so, oil, sand, and some cement on canvas or on burlap. And, we've all seen these cairns, I believe they're called, stacked rocks as monuments. It's always been a visual interest of mine. These are the Richard Serra monumental sculptures called east, west, west, east, which are in the desert in Qatar. And just, rock forms. These are some sculptures, public artworks throughout Doha. This is like a torch tower, which was built for the Asian Games in 2010 or so in Doha. But I'm showing you these because they're just kind of things that formally mostly, but in some cases conceptually, well, certainly conceptually, feed into my inspiration and then find themselves in my work somehow. In this case, just taking old canvas scraps and tying them together and throwing paint on them and spray painting them and just thinking about this idea of a monument or this solitary form. I was lucky to go to this residency in Turkey, in Cappadocia, where basically the residency was inside a cave that was made in the tufa stone, which is like stone from a volcano, from lava. And I worked on these small paintings, again, putting sand into the paint and being inspired by some of the things I was seeing there. And texture has really played a big part in my work, really since those experiments back in grad school, where I started to use texture as a way to expand my aesthetic ideas and to kind of work against my normal sensibilities. And I've been experimenting with sculpture, as you saw earlier, with some of those matchstick sculptures and other things made from found materials. But this was gave me a chance to work with this soft tufa stone, where I was doing more traditional sculpture in a sense of chisel and hammer. Another residency, this was in Italy. And here I'm kind of taking that idea of this monumental form. What is it? I'm not really sure. It's derived from my sketchbooks, from those forms that were created from text. And then again, I'm making sculpture based on those images. And in this case, I started with clay, covered it in plaster. I did some 3D scans, which hopefully some of you have done because it's super fun, and then was able to 3D print out that form, this form here. And then you could play around with it digitally, put it into actual landscapes like this one in Doha, photograph it, which I've been doing with Polaroid cameras, and then blowing it up and printing it out really large, and just experimenting and seeing how that can then work back into my painting. In this case, I made a series of these sculptures that were originally made of plaster and recyclable materials. And then they were scanned and they were made out of marble, but actually cut by a 5-axis CNC router. So I did do some finishing touches to some of these sculptures, but mostly they were made by a machine. And you could see how then I incorporated them into kind of what were still life paintings, homages to Giorgio Morandi. Some other larger paintings working on the same idea of the monument or monumentality. And this was a small show that I did at our building at VCU in Doha, where just kind of a collection of ideas, representation of my studio, the many different things I'm interested in, even just some things that might not be considered art, but just might be considered objects or collectibles. And at this time, I was thinking a lot about, what is an art object and what's the difference between something that I'm making as an art object and something I might find in an antique shop. And this was my office. So you could see, I basically just took my office aesthetic and brought it into the gallery. Um, how are we doing on time, guys? Okay, just let me know. This is work that I did in Greece. And again, just like sometimes when you take yourself out of your studio, your ideas can change. In this case, I was at the beach, this beach of rocks, and it was beautiful. And being in Greece on an artist residency was really wonderful, but it was difficult to be in the studio. So the lesson I learned here was, the post studio where I could make art anywhere. And I'm going to even make art at the beach. In this case, I'm going to paint this rock and I'm going to leave it there as a marker. And I'm going to, hope that somebody sees it and wonders where it came from and why it's there. But really for me, it was just the gesture of making a painting and leaving it in public space. I was also making paintings on paper, adding clay into them. And then I got involved in this kind of more performative piece where I was on the island of Crete for this residency, and we were visiting historical sites and ancient sites like Knossos, and thinking about Greek mythology and the whole legend of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. And it just kind of became a thing for me to just play around with. And I kind of took on this idea of becoming like some other being, like maybe a goat, half goat, half man. I was covering myself with clay that we went to this therapeutic beach. And, this became like a way for me to not only like seek therapy in my skin, as like a way to help my eczema by putting this clay on me, but also like as a therapy for an artist to like just do something weird and document it, and that's really what that one was about. And then just collecting, finding things and collecting again and thinking about art, the art object, and a piece of discarded pottery, making, pieces in the landscape that aren't going to stay, that maybe just get documented by a photograph. Another collection, we went on a walk and I just started to pick up, I noticed there were a lot of these shotgun shells. And so I just started to pick up the shotgun shells that I was coming across. And when I got to the end of the walk, I looked at it and I'm like, wow, there's all these different color shotgun shells. It's crazy. And it's like every color of the rainbow. And so that became that piece. And I was also doing some painting, but I was painting on strange materials, like this is a feed bag for animals and another one. And I was just finding these bags on the side of the road, and I would pick them up and bring them to the studio and paint with. And then making my own little collections, my own little still lives, using the toilet paper rolls, using found objects. This form is something that was like, a bandage on my finger to stop a cut from bleeding. And it was, became an art object. And we're getting into the last part of my talk. And this last segment is like from 2017 up until the present. And it's mostly going to be generated around this building that my wife and I bought here in Vermont. And it was a former church building. We didn't buy it directly from the church, but we bought it from the person that bought it from the church and had lived in it for a few years. And basically this building has been my canvas for the last 4 or 5 years. I've been doing other things in the studio as well, as you'll see, but ripping this building apart, putting it back together, finding things hidden under layers of paint, repairing the walls. In this case, my wife repairing this cracked plaster. And when you repair cracked plaster, you have to sometimes make the cracks even worse. And then, you know, you notice, wow, that's a drawing. And how is that any different than a drawing that I might make on a piece of paper or a painting that I might make on a canvas? And so just for me, it's been a wonderful place to open my mind to, you know, and then these are really kind of crummy, but, you know, pouring house paint, like what can you do with house paint, or what do you do with objects that you find or buy at a yard sale? You know, the idea of collections, just letting go a little bit of some of the more formal, traditional kind of limitations of art making. Like, I didn't touch this painting. You know, it's just a board from a shelf that I bought at a yard sale for $1. And then I took it apart and there was this painting there. And if we go back to the beginning, I should have put it in there. You know, it's very similar to that painting I did at graduate school, that green painting with the water tower on it, you know, but I didn't touch this at all. It was just a found painting. And how is this any less important than the painting that I spent 40 hours on at graduate school? So, you know, just kind of thinking about those things. In the front of the church, there's a little vestibule. And so I set up a small gallery, and it's hard to see here, but you could check out, it's expanded a lot since this early photo of the first show that we had. And I have an Instagram account if you want to check it out. And yeah, so I've been slowly turning this space, this little space, into a gallery, and inviting neighbors and locals to come and share the space and exhibit artwork in it. And then, like, projects around the house, like building this stone wall, which admittedly my wife did almost all of it. I started to help her with it, but I was relieved of the task because I wasn't really, I wasn't patient enough. I was just stacking rocks and she was building a wall. So, but these kind of projects that happen in domestic life or happen when you own a building, you know, the toilet paper roll thing broke off. So I made something, you know, that, I don't know, is just weird and fun. And I like it because I like toilet paper rolls, or hanging up clocks and being inspired by Felix Gonzalez Torres. And then realizing, oh, I'm going to Qatar. It's 7 hours ahead of us. So I'm going to make one a Qatar time and one Vermont time. And I made a flag for the building. It's kind of like the building flag based on a Bauhaus color chart. And, you know, continuing to make these paper towel rolls, I started to build some frames around them, or shelves to house them, but thinking of them now as like one painting. So this is a painting that is a movable painting. You can change the order of it. You can rearrange it. Again, projects fixing up the house that then turn into art projects. And this was just kind of came out of a challenge from my wife, where she said, you should make a mural on that wall. And so I did. And I started by repairing the wall, and then started by following some of the crack lines as a way to start the drawing. And then other things would come into the drawing, like this shape of light that came through one of the windows and appeared. And so I traced the light. And over time, the painting evolved, and it's even evolved further than this picture here, but you can see it behind me. That's the space that I'm in. And I built this shelf for my toilet paper rolls. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you had told me or shown me this type of work 5, 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have thought of it as artwork. Maybe I wouldn't have even thought of it as interesting. But if you can open yourself to get outside of your own head, I think that's been, for me anyway, like a very wonderful development in my studio practice. Is just like being more accepting of what art can be, and then taking some risks and trying to do that. That's the building. And, you know, the building is also a place where friends come and gather and we make art. We've had a few people live in the space for short periods of time, so it's almost like a residency. And then we've had friends like Dustin here come over and help with some of the projects. We've had weddings, wedding for people, for good friends as well. So 17-piece jazz band in the choir loft. And then again, opportunities just to make things, like that stained glass above the door was something that I, you know, helped make to fill that space. And stacking wood outside, it becomes like an art project. You know, it's like, okay, it's stacking wood, but I'm also moving materials and I'm building something, and I'm repairing the wall, but doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense. You know, I'm kind of finding ways to be creative in what should be uncreative situations. So like, instead of just putting drywall up here, I'm putting pieces of wood and finding pieces of wood that might be a landscape. Emptying the ashes from the wood stove and thinking about drawing. Building models of the church and thinking a lot about construction and how things are made, and this idea of lath and plaster that then comes through in my paintings, where I'm thinking about these horizontal lines, in this case, horizontal lines of text that then become horizontal lines of paint, that then become a sculpture where I'm building a wall in a traditional lath and plaster way, but also, you know, it's not a functional wall. And my series of 100 or so gouache paintings, figuring out some of these ideas. And this was a final sculpture that was part of a group show at the fire station in Doha, which was a residency program in Doha that they have, which is really super. And from that also came some paintings on canvas. And the wall again. And that turned into one of my more recent projects, which was a mural project in Qatar during COVID. So this time last year, I was not in Doha. I was here in Vermont. And that was due to you know, the pandemic, and due to an asthma condition that I have, I was able to stay here for that semester. But there was a call for public art proposals in Doha, and I wanted to participate, and I did, but I did with my students helping me. So my proposal was to recreate the mural that's behind me in Doha, but through Zoom, where I would have you know, a Zoom set up, and I would be communicating with a group of students and some alumni that would help me paint my mural in Doha as a way to bridge my two worlds and to connect with the people that I was missing, because I was here in Vermont with my American family. And these are just the last couple, just some other experiments that maybe, you know, won't go anywhere. Cement and bent metal. This was a cat that I was fostering, and it's a longer story, a good ending. She found a great home, but she's there hanging out with my paintings, which are now the second set of the paper airplane paintings. So now I've started, before I talk to you about the first 10 that I did in the book, now I'm doing the second 10, and these are slightly larger, and but I'm approaching in the same way. And still finding ways to revisit my old modes of working, which in this case are the interior space paintings. So I'm doing painting of the church before the renovation, like when we first bought it on the left, and on the right is like after some of the renovations we did. And, oh, sorry. And they're still unfinished, but this is the current state that they're at now at my studio in Doha. So this is the before renovation and this is the after, and it will get filled with a lot of other things and, you know, be very similar to some of my other interior personal space paintings. And again, I'm revisiting some of these matchstick sculptures, but now my innovation is adding this thin Kozo paper from Japan, which, you know, kind of gives them this kite quality. And I was doing that 10 years earlier in Berlin with those sculptures where I was putting receipts and beer labels on them. But now, you know, it's something different. It's clearly related, but it's something different. And the last set of works I'm going to show you are these 3 paintings, which are my most recent paintings that came out of, obviously you can see the relationship to the mural behind me and the mural that was painted in Qatar. And now I'm taking that idea back to the canvas and refining it in certain ways. It still has a you know, unrefined, maybe clunky quality to some of the work, but I'm adding texture into it. And, you know, it's just another layering of something maybe that I've done before, but now I'm doing it in a different way. And that is it. And thank you all very much for your attention. And if you want to see more, which I can't imagine, but if you do, my website there, mperrone.com, and I have probably some different work on there and, you know, some of the same work you've seen. So thank you very much for your patience.
Michael, thank you so much.
Sure.
I would love to open it up for questions, whether it's any of my students in this room that I'm in,
Yeah, sure,
or you all over Zoom as well. Feel free to just kind of chime in with a question if you'd like, and I will kind of take questions from my students and bring them to you
Yeah, sure.
as we go. I think you've answered all my students' questions already.
Yeah, well, that's, I would hope so with 200 images. Well, listen, if I know it's sometimes as a teacher, it's difficult for some students to step forward and ask a question. So no pressure. And if anyone does want to email, you know, Dustin can give you my email and we could talk more, or if you want to share your work. I know often the visiting artists get to meet with you in the studio, but unfortunately, because of this situation, we're not able to do that. But I'm happy to, you know, talk with anybody over email and see what you're up to or answer any questions that you have. Please don't hesitate.
So I actually do. I have a question. The work that you do, it's a lot of different things, right? And it seems like kind of bridging physical locales, whether it's New York and Iowa or Vermont and Qatar, is kind of runs parallel with bridging this gap between like things that you might not question, you know, think of as art, your toilet paper rolls or whatever, and then the kind of like quote unquote like real art, like painting or something like that. And in the talk, you know, it's kind of this space where you can kind of create a narrative, and this feels true. Like I've known you for a long time, and this feels very true to what you do. But we've also talked about like having anxiety about like, you know, doing so many different things, and that even though we're in a time where really any kind of art making goes, there is still this pressure that I think a lot of people feel to make things kind of look similar, to kind of have that body of work.
Sure, sure.
And can you talk about how you've kind of overcome any of those anxieties or doubts to get to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I mean, that cohesive body of work, that catchphrase that we sometimes tell our students to do, and we've done in our past. And I think that's just one, you know, maybe like I did that, a little bit. I did for a good 5 or 6 years, though, when I was making those interior paintings and I was showing them in New York when I had my 2 shows and selling some work, a good amount and feeling good about that. And, in a way, Dustin, I mean, I don't want this to sound like at all pompous, but I moved on from that in some ways. I mean, I still love to show my work. I want to show my work. I would love to have a gallery show, but it's not my main motivation. It's not my priority. It's like way down on the list. So any pressure to feel like I have to do that cohesive body of work, I've been able to um, disregard and just like do what I want to do. And I do work a lot. So I spend a lot of time making things. So maybe just over time, I'm able to keep several cohesive bodies of work, like, the paper airplane paintings, the interiors, landscape paintings that I started to do again and are in a show here in my town here in Vermont, paper towel and toilet paper roll, so I'm still doing them all. So I could show you, I could have put a different talk together that was more, less expansive and maybe more focused on specific bodies of work. But that's just not how my brain's thinking. And I've really tried over the past few years to embrace this idea of doing many things. And just, even though it's hard sometimes, still, I want to just keep doing that and not get rooted into one way of making. I want to be able to sew something if I feel like sewing something, or make a puppet if, and I edited some things out. I mean, puppet making and sewing drawings and, other things. I just love doing it all. That's part of it. And I think the other thing is also just maybe not getting bored, but there is a certain tediousness to doing the same action over and over and over again. Like when I'm working with tape and making an acrylic painting, there's a tediousness to that process that sometimes I just want to, take a brush and not be precise with it. And so instead of doing it all in one painting, I'm just make a different painting, a different type of painting. So it keeps it fresh also for me in the studio, where I might get bored otherwise. Did I answer your question or did I avoid it?
Maybe those two are the same thing. No, you did answer it. Thank you.
Sure.
I have so many more questions, but I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, of course.
If anyone else has any questions, please do chime in. Otherwise, we will wrap it up.
Yeah, Michael, I've got a question for you.
Sure, Greg.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, you seem like a very, very diverse in your practice, but also that there's a real role of reflection in your work. And it might just be that, you're showing us 200 slides starting from before grad school all the way to present. So, but you mentioned that you always keep a sketchbook. You always use your phone as a daily kind of practice, as a tool for recording your environment, is a useful thing for you. Do you also do writing or other forms of reflection? I'm wondering about other bolstering of your practice in that regard.
Sure.
It's sometimes useful for students too.
Oh, and it is, it's one of those, the short answer is not so much. The longer answer is, yes, you write an artist statement and you don't have one statement for your whole life. You're constantly changing it. And that's a time where I do some reflection, or I think about, the specific body of work that I may be showing or writing the statement for. But I'm not, I don't do that so much. And, there are certainly artists in my world, particularly my wife, who does that a lot. And she's, published a couple of her writings about her work. It's just not, it's not that I'm not a thinker, but I don't know if I'm a brain thinker like that. I'm more of a thinker with my hands and with my making. I love my favorite book, probably my favorite art book is Gerhard Richter's The Daily Practice of Painting, which, is that amazing chronicling of ideas and process and, just, an inspiration that I've probably read it several times. And, it's a big thing that I hand out to my students. So I'm all for the process, but maybe not so much for me. Like I just, I almost like to not think. And even, like those drawings where I'm scratching out the words, I don't know if this is true, but some of my thoughts about those, I wonder if I'm doing, the opposite of what you might be suggesting, where I'm actually, getting rid of these words with meaning. I don't want to think about what they mean, or I just want them to become a visual element in my work. So in a way, I'm suppressing the content of the words. Yeah, I guess I'm a Philistine. No, but I do try not to think so much. And yeah, it's something that's interesting because, as a teacher also, there is a pressure and a expectation, to think about content, think about concept. It's something we drill into our students. And I think, sometimes I wonder if that is what we should be doing. And, it's something I try to teach them how to do if they want to do it, but then also be open and free to let them just be a maker and, be more like me, okay, I know how to do this if I have to do it, but what I really want to do is just make a painting and not have to explain it.
Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking
Thank
with
you
us.
all. And thanks to Greg and you and your colleagues for inviting me. And thanks to a few of my friends that showed up. That was really nice. And thanks to all the students. Just keep it going. It's a long journey and there's no one right way. And you just got to trust yourself and just keep making. And I think, it's a great life being an artist. And I just feel so lucky to be able to do what I love to do. And yeah, thank you for letting me share it.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Okay, let's see you all.
Oh, got applause.
All right. Bye-bye. We'll talk to you soon, guys.
All right, take care.